On Friday, May 24th, the Karen Reed trial entered day 17 of testimony. On day 17, the jury heard from the prosecution's 43rd witness, Brian Higgins. Now, there's been a lot of reference to Brian Higgins throughout this trial, particularly for his friendship with Brian Albert. But on day 17, things got a little bit salacious. And now we are going to need to revisit what I said at the end of day 16 about the Aruba incident. And it seems that we are going to get some more information here about the defense's third-party culprit theory. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's just jump right into Brian Higgins' testimony. The day started out with his direct examination. So according to his testimony, on January 28th, the day started out by going down to New York City for the funeral of a fallen police officer, as we have heard before. When he came back, he had Brian Albert, Kevin Albert, and another Boston PD officer named Eddie Hernandez with him in the car. And because he drove an official vehicle to the funeral, he had to stop by Canton PD, where his personal Jeep was parked. Now, note that he is an ATF agent. Despite the fact that he's not really connected to the Canton PD with his work, he apparently has an office there for some kind of convenience. Apparently, it's not all that uncommon. Anyway, after he picked up his Jeep, he said that he was tired and hungry after a long day, and he wanted to basically get some food and drink. So he headed to the hillside. Now, this is an interesting point because on cross-examination, Alan Jackson asked him about the fact that he had had this particular touch point with Canton PD on that day. And this is because later, at the end of the day, after he left 34 Fairview Road, Brian apparently went back to Canton PD around 1 or 1:30 a.m. Now, the reason why he said that he wanted to go back to Canton PD station was because he said that there were a couple other vehicles that he was responsible for, and they were otherwise in the way of the snow plows, and so he needed to clear them from the parking lot so that the snow could be cleared. And so he said that he knew that he would need to move them eventually before the snow plows came by in the morning. So rather than having to get up early in the morning to come back, he said that he just stopped by that night to take care of it before going home. But the reason why Jackson highlighted this is because he said, well, you knew that this big snowstorm was coming. I mean, that's why you left New York earlier than you had anticipated. So why didn't you just move those cars when you first got back to switch to your Jeep? And Brian's response was basically like, well, it had been a long day and I really just wanted some food and a drink in that moment. Now, the reason why the defense is really pushing on this is because they wanted to highlight, at the very least, the opportunity that Brian Higgins had to go back to Canton PD in those early morning hours to either influence the investigation or even just to get advanced information on it after John O'Keefe had already died. Now, how convincing that sounds to you might depend on your perspective on the case so far, as well as the rest of Brian Higgins' testimony. For example, there's the part where Alan Jackson hinted that the surveillance footage of the Canton PD Sallyport entrance, which Brian said that he used throughout the day, was somehow missing from the precise time that Karen's SUV was brought in later in the day on January 29th.
You didn't leave Canton PD until close to 6 p.m., isn't that right?
I don't know what time I left.
Could it have been 5:50, 6 o'clock?
I don't recall what time I left.
You're aware that there's video surveillance feeds in the Sallyport garage, correct?
That's correct, yes. Around the building.
Were you in the Sallyport at 5:36 when the car was delivered?
I don't have any recollection of that, no.
It's one thing to say I don't remember, it's another thing to say no, I was not there.
I don't remember being there, no.
Is it possible that you could have been there when that car was delivered?
I don't believe I was, no.
You don't believe you were?
I don't believe I was, no.
You're aware that the video surveillance feed from the Sallyport garage at or around 5:36, the precise time when the car was delivered, it's just missing, right?
Objection.
Sustained. Anyway, so Brian said that after he was finished at the hillside, he was planning to just Irish goodbye everyone, because that's apparently just always his style. It's how he usually leaves places. But then he said that he decided to go to the Waterfall Bar and Grill to meet up with the gang anyway. He said he got there at about 9 p.m. He testified that Karen and John walked in around 11 p.m. and that Karen had had a tall glass with clear liquid in it, just as everybody else has testified. Also, he further confirmed that her glass did not come from the waterfall. And he said that he knew this because the glass had some sort of a bubble design on the side of it that you typically don't see at the waterfall. So again, it seems that we have testimony of people seeing at most one drink in Karen's hand. And that, of course, is assuming that this drink even had any alcohol in it at all. Anyway, then he referenced a flirty text that he apparently sent to Karen while at the waterfall that night. This was a text that apparently said, well. But it wasn't until later in his direct examination that we got a better picture of the text exchange between them and kind of what this all sort of meant. We'll get to all that Boston tea soon, but first I want to go over the rest of Brian Higgins' timeline for these events. So around midnight, Brian said that he was the first one to leave the waterfall and the first one to arrive at 34 Fairview. He said that after he parked, he went inside when Nicole and Brian Albert arrived. However, despite that, he said that he never saw Colin Albert, and he even said that if he walked into the courtroom that day, he wouldn't be able to identify him. Anyway, when he went inside, he said that he went straight to the kitchen where Brian Albert Jr. and his friends were sitting. Brian Higgins said that he basically parked himself so that his back was to the door, so he never noticed any sort of SUV coming up, unlike other people who testified. Anyway, he said that he only stayed there for about 30 minutes to an hour, part of that because of the fact that they were serving beer and that's not really what he drinks, and then he decided to leave. But before he went home, like I mentioned, he first stopped by Canton PD station. Eventually, he said that he went home, and then in the morning, all of his work and personal phones were apparently blowing up around 6:30 a.m. He said that the first call that he got was from Chief Berkowitz, whose call Brian said that he had missed. Next, he said that he talked to Brian Albert, who he said told him about John being found on the front lawn at 34 Fairview Road. Brian Higgins said that he went over to the Albert's home, where there was a group of people from the Albert and McCabe clan. This also included Julie Albert, who, as we know, came over with donuts for Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday. He testified he was there for less than an hour that morning, and then went back to Canton PD before going back home. Now, after all of this had happened, he apparently was interviewed by Trooper Michael Proctor and Trooper Yuriy Bukhenik. Brian said that he had worked with Proctor, but couldn't really remember him. But Proctor, on the other hand, apparently remembered Brian Higgins. Now, Brian said that he did know more or less who Bukhenik was, but only had seen him pretty much in passing. Anyway, in this interview, he said that he provided a bunch of text messages between himself and John, and between himself and Karen. And here's where the trial kind of gets into salacious overdrive. Apparently, Karen and Brian Higgins started texting on January 12th, 2022. And although these texts really only span between January 12th and January 29th, there really are quite a few texts between them. And I will say I've seen a little bit around social media that tells me that there are a number of interpretations of these messages and what they mean. Now, I'm going to give you my take. Feel free to agree or disagree. And if you do disagree, let me know your take in the comments down below. Okay. So remember how I said at the end of day 16 that it sounded like the Aruba incident was basically resolved and it seemed like Karen and John had pretty much closed this whole chapter out. And I said that unless the prosecution introduced some kind of evidence that the whole drama was actually still festering, I couldn't see that it being any kind of an issue for Karen, resulting in developing into some sort of a motive for her to kill John. Well, now we do in fact have some evidence that although this was maybe resolved in conversation between the two of them, Karen seems like she was still privately holding on to the details of this controversy. I say this because at one point she texted Brian Higgins that John had kissed a girl in Aruba and basically that they had had some serious cracks in their relationship. She also made reference to this idea that basically all couples dislike each other, and that seems to suggest that Karen and John were in a place where they probably didn't like each other. So clearly it sounds like there are in fact problems in the relationship, and it seems like she still firmly believes that John did in fact cheat on her with Marietta in Aruba around New Year's 2022. So the question then becomes, if she's still holding on to this, does that mean that she's willing to murder John, either to get out of the relationship or out of a fit of jealousy, like if I can't have him, no one can? So first, let's address that first question. Now, when someone kills a romantic partner to get out of the relationship, it typically coincides with the alleged killer being in a much more vulnerable position than their partner. Basically, what we're looking at is, are they freely able to walk away from the relationship? And if not, what is it that's stopping them? Factors would include things like they're married and there are some sort of social or religious impact that a divorce would actually stop this person from leaving. Another factor is financial. How would leaving the romantic partner impact the defendant financially? Could they even support themselves? And how about when there are kids in the mix? Who would be either burdened or freed to have the kids after the breakup? In this particular case, it sounds like all of these factors actually point towards Karen being actually able to pretty freely leave this relationship. She has her own money and her own career. She also still has her own home. She's not financially dependent on John, and from what it sounds like, she probably actually out-earns him. They're not married, so there really isn't much of a social impact for them breaking up. And now there are kids involved, but those kids aren't actually Karen's kids. And it sounds like she was nevertheless being the one that was burdened with taking care of them in the relationship. So basically, all of this says that there would actually be a substantial amount of freedom that she would get in breaking up if they decided that they were there. Instead, this is what these text messages show me about Karen's mental state and the state of their relationship. Okay, so like I said, she's probably still holding on to the Aruba incident. She does seem to still privately believe that John cheated on her, even though she apologized to Laura and apparently paid for part of Marietta's room. So there is some festering there. I will give the prosecution that. However, does that mean that she's in the mental state where she would actually murder him out of revenge or jealousy? People can and will disagree, but here's my take. I don't see it. I don't think that this, on the facts provided so far, is enough of a motive to kill. What I see here with these text messages is Karen being incredibly insecure in her relationship with John. Things do look unstable, like maybe they are about to break up. And part of this seems to be stemming from the whole thing that happened in Aruba. And so her response to that whole controversy is to reach out to a guy in their social circle and start coming on to him and ultimately just lead him on. She apparently takes a forward role in kissing him in a romantic way when he's on his way out of the door of John's house one night.
And if you know about how long were you at Mr. O'Keefe's house that night?
Well, I was probably one of the last people to leave, I think.
And what, if anything, happened as you were exiting from Mr. O'Keefe's house that night?
So as I was exiting the house, it was either through the breezeway or the garage. And as we were walking out, the defendant planted a kiss on me.
Now, before you went out that way, where was Mr. O'Keefe? Did you say goodbye to him or anything like that?
I think I said goodbye to him. He might have been in the bathroom. I'm not 100% positive where he was.
And when you went to leave, which exit from the house were you headed to initially?
Well, as I said, I don't remember exactly if it was the breezeway or the garage I was starting to walk through, but whichever way I started to exit, the defendant told me to go a different way.
And which way did the defendant tell you to go?
Well, her way. I honestly can't tell you which door that was. If it was either the breezeway or the garage.
And as you were going out, again, I'm sorry, what happened?
The defendant kissed me.
And how did she kiss you?
Not like a friend.
Lip to lip, is that fair to say?
Yes.
Like a romantic kiss?
That's the way I interpreted it.
On top of this, she elicits like a whole conversation where she has reason to believe that he's going to give her tons of compliments and show her that he has an interest in her. In other words, she might be thinking, well, my current man doesn't appreciate me, but hey, I've still got it. And basically, if she decided to leave the relationship, she could still attract another dude. What all of this tells me is that she's getting back at John for what she believes was John cheating. And she's getting back at him in basically the same exact way that she thought that he cheated on her. by kissing someone else. She's also eliciting all of this feel-good attention from Brian Higgins in these texts because she's soothing her ego to put a band-aid on her insecurities rather than dealing with them in a healthy way. Now, I'm not saying any of this to excuse any of her behavior in any way. I don't like to see it. She says that they're not married, they're in a relationship, and somehow that's totally different. I personally disagree, but that is a matter of taste, and people can totally disagree with me on that. But basically what I see is she's kind of just excusing herself for stepping outside of the relationship to soothe this ego and to feel like she's sort of balanced the cheating scales in the relationship, so to speak. And at the end of the day, we do have to keep this whole analysis tied to the evidence that is in front of us. And these text messages just don't indicate to me that she's taking this rocky state of their relationship to drive her to desperation and clinginess over John. In fact, it kind of looks just the opposite. In these text messages, it looks like she's almost disassociating with John a bit, almost mentally preparing for them to break up and to go their separate ways. Refers to herself as single at least once, even while acknowledging that she has a boyfriend. That doesn't speak to me like someone who is ramping up their desperation over losing her man and who is willing to use violence to keep him in the relationship. And this is coupled with the fact that I kind of was expecting that the Aruba incident would include some kind of display of violence by Karen. But there was no indication that she ever struck him in any way, or even that she threw any objects in the hotel room or broke anything. It sounded like they had a verbal fight, and John was down for a couple days as a result. And I say this not to deny the existence of emotional abuse. That is not what we're talking about here. But what we're looking for here is a pattern of behavior that the prosecution would find useful in showing that Karen is somehow likely to have used violence in the midst of a bad argument. But there's just nothing in the evidence presented so far. Instead, what I see is a woman who wants to go tit for tat when she feels like she's been wronged by her significant other. And it's also equally possible that this situation with Brian was exactly that. Get back at John, soothe her ego, and then go back to business as usual. It becomes clear, for example, in the text messages that she was non-committal with Brian, despite the fact that he was making many attempts to get clarity on their status and what she wanted from him. Then, starting around January 22nd or 23rd, after they had started texting only on the 12th, Karen more or less stopped responding to his texts other than occasional vague responses. And when they next saw each other on the evening of the 28th at the Waterfall Bar and Grill, she basically ignored him. And that seems to be why Brian Higgins sent her that quote-unquote flirty text that he had testified about earlier in his direct examination. But the defense worked to make it very clear that Karen basically stopped showing interest in Brian by that point.
Karen didn't stop what she was doing once she was over in the corner of the bar and come over and say hi to you?
I didn't have any interaction with her that night, no.
So safe to say that throughout that evening, once she was sidled up next to John O'Keefe or the friends that she was with, she never turned back around and came over and even acknowledged you, correct?
That's correct.
So she basically ignored you the entire evening?
That's not how I interpret it, no.
I didn't ask you how you interpreted it. I asked you what she did. Did she ignore you or did she pay attention to you?
Objection.
You can go ahead and answer that. Did she ignore you?
No.
So she paid attention to you. Came over and said hello, shook your hand, gave you a hug.
Well, just because somebody didn't come over doesn't mean they ignored you.
Did she do those three things?
Hug? What was the other thing?
Say hello, shake your hand, give you a hug?
No, she did not.
No, she didn't do any of those things, did she?
No.
It was like you didn't even exist.
I think that's dramatic. No, I don't look at it that way.
Did she ignore you or not?
No, she did not ignore me.
So what did she do to not ignore you?
She was
Interaction with you.
Can I answer now?
Sure.
In my opinion, she was working the room, talking to people, saying hello, catching up.
Right. The one person she didn't come over to talk to and say hello to and catch up with is you.
Well, I don't know that I was the only person, but I was one of the people that she didn't say hello to, yes.
Treated you sort of like a stranger.
I don't feel that way, no.
She actually positioned herself away from you at the other end of the table on the opposite side in the corner. Isn't that right?
I don't know where she was all night, no. I don't know.
Did that upset you that she ignored you or didn't pay attention to you?
I did not feel ignored and didn't upset me at all.
But it bothered you enough to send her a text, didn't it?
No, it was a flirtatious text. It was just, that was it.
it bothered you enough to send her a text that said, with 6 M's behind it,
Okay.
and, well, correct?
Well, it wasn't like that. It was, well, that's it.
Just, well, like a well in the ground.
I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think you do too, sir. You meant, well, when are you gonna pay attention to me?
No, that's not correct.
Well, why are you ignoring me?
It's not correct.
Well, am I chopped liver?
Objection.
All right, that's sustained. Mr. Jackson, let's move on.
So, like I said, to me, this all seems to be an exercise in soothing Karen's bruised ego. But I just don't see the logical jump between that and Karen suddenly turning violent when there is a fight between her and John. Anyway, there were some other very interesting topics that came up on Brian Higgins' cross-examination. One of these was Brian Higgins' testimony that there was at one point a tall, dark-haired man who had come into the house. Brian tried to wriggle out of this on cross-examination because his current testimony left that detail out, but it didn't really seem to go all that well for him.
Did you say a tall, dark-haired male entered the house while you were there?
I said they might have.
Did you say they might have?
Yes. And that was in reference to
Let me have
somebody's
just a moment,
brother.
Your Honor.
Yes.
Isn't it true that you indicated that a male showed up who may have been Julie Nagel's brother, correct?
I said might have, yes.
Right. But there was no question in your mind that a male did in fact show up, and you described him as tall and dark-haired, right?
Yes.
You were asked, a male showed up where? And you answered, quote, showed up at the house that I didn't know. I think he was there very briefly. I was half paying attention to it. Question, did that male come inside the house? Answer, I believe he did. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So a male did come in the house that night, correct?
No, I said I believe he did. I wasn't sure.
Well, when you testified at the prior hearing, you were asked, so you saw someone else come? Question. Answer, somebody else. Yes. End quote. That's what you testified to under oath, wasn't it?
Is that in reference to that?
What page are you on, Mr. Jackson?
Page 485, 486, I believe. Yes. Mr. Higgins, do you have that in mind?
I do.
May I approach?
Yes.
You were asked the question, quote, did that male come inside the house? You answered, I believe he did. Question, so you saw someone else come? Answer, somebody else. Yes. Correct?
Yes, but I also said that I wasn't paying
Mr. Higgins,
attention.
I realize that you want to explain your answer. I've asked you a very simple question. Was that your testimony in front of another proceeding?
Yes, it was.
At another proceeding, which you were under oath?
Yes, it was.
Okay. You also said that you only remember seeing that person come in briefly. And it looked like he was having a conversation with the two girls, briefly, correct?
Yes.
You were asked how long was the person in there roughly, and you said it was quick. Less than a couple of minutes. I mean, it was quick, correct?
Yes.
And then you were asked what he looked like, and you said, I feel like they were a little bit taller. They had dark hair, correct?
Yes.
So you testified that a tall, dark-haired male came into the house, at least briefly, in your testimony, correct?
Yes.
Approximately when in the timeline of events did that unidentified male enter the residence?
I don't know the time frame. It would have been while I was there.
When you gave your statement to the Massachusetts State Police, you didn't tell them about a tall, dark-haired male coming into the residence at 34 Fairview, did you, on February 3rd?
I don't recall.
You were specifically asked by ADA Lally when you testified before the state court grand jury on April 28th, 2022, who else was present, correct?
Yes.
And you never mentioned a tall, dark-haired male coming into the house, did you?
No.
However, on June 1st, 2023, at this other proceeding, you were specifically instructed at the start of your testimony that it was a crime to give materially false statements in that proceeding, correct?
Yes.
And that's the proceeding in which you admitted that there was a tall, dark-haired male who came in the house.
I
Yes
said
or
I-
no? Yes or no? It was that proceeding.
Can you answer that, yes or no?
No, I can't, Your Honor.
Next question, Mr. Jackson.
The quotations that or the quotes that I just read you and that you just looked at?
Yes.
That was from the June 1, 2023 hearing, wasn't it?
I don't know.
May I approach?
Yes.
What's the date, sir?
June 1st?
2023?
Yes.
So it seems to be that there was this suggestion that Brian thought maybe this was Ryan Nagel, Julie Nagel's brother. But we know that that simply doesn't fit with this testimony because no one else testified that saw him or even was him that he went inside the house that night. The only other options, it seems, would be that he was talking about either Colin Albert or John O'Keefe. It is still a bit of a mystery based on what has actually been presented to the jury at this point, but we'll see if anything comes out to shed more light on it. Anyway, another thing that came up was some more weird phone calls that happened at weird hours. Remember how Brian Albert testified that he had butt dialed Brian Higgins at like 2 a.m.-ish when he was having, I suppose, an intimate moment with his wife, Nicole Albert? Well, here the defense revisited this, and this time, of course, with Brian Higgins.
Your testimony previously was at some point before 7 a.m., that call was the one that woke you up.
Yes.
And it turns out, Mr. Higgins, that was a lie, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't a lie.
When you were asked that question at a previous hearing, you didn't know that the person questioning you had your phone records, did you?
I assume they did.
And you were thereafter confronted with those phone records, correct?
I was asked about them, yes.
And those phone records established that you and Brian Albert actually exchanged not one, but 2 phone calls at 2:22 a.m. that morning, at a time when you claimed you were in bed asleep, correct?
I have no recollection of any phone calls.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Take a look at the one that's marked with the QQ.
I see it.
You've seen that document before, correct?
I think I've seen it maybe on a screen, not in my hand.
That was these were the records that were shown to you at a prior hearing?
Yes.
And you acknowledge that at least the one marked QQ is a record of your calls, correct?
It has my name, my telephone number, correct.
And it indicates that on January 29th, 2022, at 2:22 and 35 seconds, you received a call from Brian Albert, duration of 1 second, correct?
Yes.
In other words, Brian Albert called you at 2:22 and 35 seconds, but it looks like you missed the call, correct?
I see the 1 second call, yes.
There's a second call just below that. On the same date at 2:22 and 52 seconds from you to Brian Albert. Do you see that one?
Yes.
And the duration of that call is 22 seconds, correct?
I see that, yes.
So 17 seconds after you missed a call, according to these records, from Brian Albert, you called him back, and there was a call lasting 22 seconds. Is that right?
That's what the records say.
May I approach?
Yes.
So the fact is, you were speaking to Brian Albert in the middle of the night, approximately 3 hours before Mr. O'Keefe's body was found in his yard, correct?
No, that's not correct.
And that was 5 minutes before 2:27 a.m. when there was a Google search for how long to die in the cold, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
And then, of course, you lied about that under oath in that prior proceeding by saying, I don't remember this phone call.
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you, in fact, tell the truth at the prior proceeding when you said, I don't remember that phone call?
I always tell the truth.
Did you lie under oath, sir?
No, I did not.
Would you tell us if you did?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
You acknowledge that there's a 22-second phone call in your phone records, correct?
That's what's reflected by the record.
And 22 seconds is quite an amount of time. Would you agree?
It's 22 seconds.
But now, when actually asked to explain these calls, you'll never guess what Brian called them.
Now, when you were asked about this and you were shown these records, that prior hearing, you had an explanation for what that 22-second call may have been and what the prior call may have been, correct?
Yes.
What was your explanation?
Well, I used a phrase that people commonly used as a butt dial.
So you think it's possible that you may have butt dialed Brian Albert for a 22-second call that you're not aware of?
I think it's possible that he could have been inadvertently called back, but I have no recollection of that, nor did I have any conversation with anybody.
But you admitted that you lived alone, correct, Mr. Higgins?
That's correct.
You have an iPhone at the time.
Yes.
Matter of fact, that number, for the reflecting those records, is in fact, or was in fact, an iPhone. Is that right?
Yes.
You already indicated under oath that you don't sleep with your iPhone. You keep it on your bedside table. Is that right?
Most often, yes.
There's nobody else in your room. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you had your ringer on because you were awakened the next morning by a call from Chief Berkowitz, right?
Yes, the ringer was on.
When somebody calls you and you miss the call, there's a notification that shows up on that iPhone. Isn't that right?
I don't know how mine's set up at the time. I don't know.
If you open up your phone app and you go to recents, it shows all the missed calls, correct?
I think you can get to them, yes.
And you know that the iPhone does not automatically call people back. That is not a thing, right? You miss a call from someone, it's not just going to automatically re-ring them.
Yes, I think we both know that, yes.
So to call somebody back, you have to go on your iPhone, open it up from a locked position, navigate to a phone application, then navigate to a contact, and then make a call, correct?
Objection.
Sustained. You can break it down.
Sure. In order to call somebody back, if you've missed a call, you first have to unlock your iPhone.
You would have to, yes.
You can do that either through Face ID or through a 4 or 6-digit passcode, right?
Yes.
Don't tell me the code, but did you have a 4 or a 6-digit passcode locking your iPhone at the time?
I don't know if it was a digit code or a Face ID.
Well, if you have a Face ID, you have to have a digit code as well, right?
I guess so.
Okay. Did you open your phone with your Face ID or a multi-digit code?
I have no recollection of answering the phone or calling anybody back.
You also have to navigate, once the phone is unlocked, you have to navigate to the phone app, correct?
I don't know necessarily if you unlocked it with your face, if it would be right there. I've never thought about it.
Once you unlock that phone app, you have to manipulate the phone on the screen with your finger in order to make a call, correct?
You would have to hit at least one button, I guess.
At least one, right?
Yes.
So that's 3 or 4 interactions with the phone that have to be physically undertaken to just make one call, right?
But I didn't make any calls.
So how'd you butt dial?
I didn't make any calls. I have no recollection of any calls, nor did I speak with anybody.
Or maybe you will. Yeah, it's butt dials. He said it was butt dial. Okay. So I don't know what is going on here. But it seems like Canton, Massachusetts is like the butt dialing capital of the world, according to this trial. I will say Brian Higgins' demeanor while testifying generally comes across as more straightforward than most of the other witnesses who have testified in this trial. But his testimony about the butt dialing is weird. The fact that all of these people seem to be butt dialing each other around 2:30 in the morning is just starting to feel, I don't know, like rehearsed, coordinated even.
And why you might have called me today, on this day, specifically today?
Look, I didn't call you. My butt called you.
Like, I still don't feel like I have enough information to be able to satisfyingly conclude that Karen Reed was framed. But again, why are all of these people acting so weird? If they didn't do anything to coordinate some kind of a cover-up to push John O'Keefe's death onto Karen Reed improperly, they're not doing themselves any favors with any of these weird events or weird explanations that all seem to echo one another. And speaking of echoes of prior testimony, so this cross-examination started out a little slow, but it did end up with a pretty distinct crescendo. And it did so while covering a familiar subject, cell phones that may or may not have since been rehomed. To lead into this, Jackson went over how Brian apparently used an FBI kiosk to extract some very specific information from his phone, particularly the text messaging threads between himself and John and between himself and Karen. And Brian testified that he did this so that he could hand the data over to the police investigating the case.
The information that was ultimately pulled off your phone was the information that you selected and you and Matt Kelch worked together to get off your phone, correct?
Objection.
Is that correct?
No, Your Honor, if I could explain.
Sure.
He walked me through on how I could pull the text string with John O'Keefe and the defendant. He walked me through the process, how to use the machine.
And then you did that.
I did do that, that's correct.
That's what you turned over to the police.
That's correct.
And any other information would still be on your phone ending in 5421, correct?
Well, that information stayed on my phone. I just took those strings off and provided them to the Mass State
Right.
Police.
So where's your phone?
I do not have that phone anymore.
You've destroyed that phone, haven't you?
No, I threw the phone away.
Well, that's destroying the phone, isn't it?
I had every right to do that.
I didn't ask you about your rights. I asked you what you did.
Objection.
Sustained.
You destroyed the phone by removing the SIM card. Half, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you do that? Did you pull the SIM card out?
Objection.
Did you pull the SIM card out of your phone?
Your Honor, to the best of my recollection, if I did take the SIM card out, I would when I threw it away, if I was going to take it out, I would break it or cut it. But I did not wipe the phone. I did not take anything else off it. But if I was going to throw the phone away, that's what I would have done.
Okay.
You know, as an ATF agent with electronic data experience, when you pull the SIM card out and break it, and then throw the phone away and the SIM card away, you don't need to wipe the phone.
Objection.
Sustained. Mr. Jackson, that's it.
Your Honor.
One more question.
I can do this in 30 seconds, I think. You were aware that there was a court order that you not alter, delete, or destroy, or in any way manipulate your phone or the electronic data associated with it, correct?
Objection.
As to what date?
As of September 30th, 2022.
Objection.
Okay.
I don't believe that's what the court order was. I think it's
I can make a quick offer of proof. That's exactly what it was that he was notified.
Were you aware of that? Was that your understanding?
What's the question exactly, Your Honor? I'm sorry.
That's the question again.
Sure. Were you served with a copy of a notice on September 30th, 2022, that you not alter or destroy or manipulate anything on your phone on September 30th?
I was served an order, yes, that's correct.
And isn't it true, in another hearing, you explained that on September 29th, the day before you claim you got that notice, you changed phone carriers and changed phone numbers?
And I maintained the phone.
Until you didn't, when you destroyed it a month later by pulling the SIM card out and throwing it away, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you do that in October? Did you destroy that phone?
Objection.
Sustained.
Did you pull the SIM card out of your phone, Mr. Higgins?
Did you?
It's possible that I did. I believe that's how I've testified, yes.
You testified
It's
at a previous-
possible that if I took it out, that it was either cut or broken.
It's not just possible.
So that,
And that would have been after the date the order was already denied.
Mr. Higgins, I have one question left. One question. Did you, Mr. Mr. Lally already standing. I haven't even started.
Have a seat, Mr. Lally. Go ahead. Last question, Mr. Jackson.
Quiet, please, quiet.
Mr. Higgins, very simply, and then we're done. Did you remove the SIM card for that phone, drive onto a military base, throw the SIM card in one dumpster and the phone in a different dumpster?
That is not correct.
Did you testify that?
That was your one question, Mr. Jackson.
So that's where Brian Higgins' cross-examination left off for the day. We now have testimony from the witness that he threw his phone away, and somehow that is different from destroying evidence. And we also have testimony that he also took the SIM card out and actually destroyed it before discarding it. Now, he did just deny at the very end that he went to a military base so that he could toss the SIM card into one dumpster and the phone into another dumpster. But Jackson was cut off from being able to ask any follow-up questions to try to hammer him further on the point because the judge did cut off testimony for the day. But without any doubt, Jackson absolutely is going to be picking up with this line of questioning on the morning of day 18, and he'll have a chance to fully explore the subject. And either way, Jackson just sent the jurors home for the long weekend with the idea that Brian Higgins went a few extra miles to destroy his phone data and to make it entirely unrecoverable. Which of course leads to the question, why would he do that? What kind of information is on the phone that would be maybe less fun to have the police or the investigators come across? So regardless of Brian Higgins' denial to Alan Jackson's question, that question is undoubtedly on the jurors' minds. And that is absolutely a powerful thing to be thinking about over the course of the long weekend. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Do you have a different take on the meaning of those text messages between Karen Reed and Brian Higgins? What do you make of this cell phone rehoming situation? Let us know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to continue seeing more daily coverage of the Karen Reed murder trial through daily recaps and through gavel-to-gavel live stream coverage, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next one's out. See you on day 18.